Welcome to Self-Service Finding Operator Weekly Call. Today is November 25th. I have added one item in the topic for discussion. Please add any other items that we can discuss today. So otherwise, I can start with that first topic unless anybody else. Okay, I'll wait.
Go for it.
Okay. Okay, then I'll start with this first topic. That is, sometimes back we introduced few, default support, out of the box support for backing services in SBO. Currently, we have, I think, 4 or 5 services that is supported. Uh, because that was really required because to have a, you know, booster the adoption, right? So otherwise, the SBO would be without any services. So that was our motivation. So my question is, how far we need to expand this one? Like, do we need to add more services into the list of support services, or if that is not the thing, should we, go and reach out to the various backing services and ask them to support the official spec itself. That means through the uh, provision service. That's the right approach, since we don't have much provision services. I think only one service will be support through provision service, if I remember correctly. Otherwise, so yeah. So my question is, do we need to go for this more services to be added into the SBO out of the box, or should we explore creating or encouraging people community to work on the provision services? This is a topic that I want to discuss in summary. Yeah.
Sorry, I have something just in my nose.
Mhm.
So the goal of having some services that are available out of the box with service binding is that at the moment, there's very few service provider that are going to be compatible with the specification of service binding. It's going to take a little bit of time and a little bit of effort before we get to that point. So by having the support of certain services out of the box with service binding operator, it makes service binding operator valuable for the developers, even if the service providers are not compliant with the specification. That means that I can use it, I can leverage it, I can see how it works, and the hope is that we will get users and adoption from the developers, and when we will get into the discussion with the different service provider, we can show them the value that service binding operator is providing, and we can highlight with feedbacks from the developers the reason why they will need to become compliant with the specification. Now, that doesn't mean that we should not do the effort of trying to engage with the service provider and trying to get them on board right now. But if you can show some examples, some developers that are using it, and some feedbacks, it's going to be easier to get them signing off for becoming compliant with the specification. Because that is something they might not do today. Maybe it's something that will require a little bit of effort for them, and it is something that they will be able to schedule in their own roadmap in 6 months, 9 months, or something like that. So before that, we need to be able to show and to provide service binding operator to the developers in a way that is valuable for them. So that's why we are doing this. We have an effort of trying to get some service providers becoming compliant, and we are looking for opportunities to collaborate with the community on that. We identified that there is an open source operator for MongoDB where we would love to contribute and to make it compatible with the service binding specification. And there's other ones that we have been identifying as well. But those are different folds, but under one, which is getting community adoption and getting developer adoption for service binding operator. Does it make sense, Baiju?
Yeah, I agree that. I understand your point. I mean, I understand that, in the early days, without having out-of-box support, developers will not be able to use the services. So, and it's good for our faster adoption. And slowly, once backend service starts supporting the spec, we can remove at some point of time. So that's a good thing. So, but how far? I mean, what are the? How do we decide? Okay, we need to support this and these services, right? Is there any popularity list or some? We already have some list which is there currently supported. How do we expand that? What is the strategy? I mean, criteria like to include into that list of services.
So we look at the different reports that exist, that we have internally, but also the ones that are available to the community, where we see what are the most deployed services on Kubernetes, and we try to be compatible with those. That's the strategy, is to look at what are the services that are the most used by the developers and being compatible with those services.
Okay, again, most used ones, right?
Most used one, yes.
Yeah. Okay. So I think we can compile a list of services, in addition to what we already support, and then
we have few more
on that.
In the backlog. We have few more that we are looking at working with.
Yeah, right. I have that list. Actually, I was going through that, and some of the things which we've identified are not really proper tracking services. Some of them are, okay, I'll create this list here, and then we can discuss about that. Yeah, we need to explore and check whether that really we need support or not. That list is, yeah, we can try to complete that list, and then add more into the list. Yeah. Anybody else has any thought on this one? So we can continue to support, right? Adding more into the services. Something with that.
Well, I mean, we start with the list that was provided, right? And if we need to add more, we can do it then. But at the moment, let's focus just on the ones that we have.
Yeah. Okay. Right. Focus on what we have now list, and then we can add more into that. Yeah. Current. I'll paste it list here. I think it's somewhere in my other document. Okay, I think I'm good. So let's add more services out of the box, with focusing on the current list, and then we can expand the list once we are done with that.
Yeah, and also keep in mind that it is a trigger as well. So each time we add support for a backing service, if we have a sample demo, a sample code, and a way to show off the value of service binding operator in this context with this service provider, it is also a trigger marketing activities and making some noise into the community about the compatibility between the services and service binding operator. We have been reached out by few service provider because of this, because we have been calling out, hey, we are compatible with your service, and they show a little bit of interest in this regard, in this context.
Yeah, right. Yeah, having more examples also would be more helpful to showcase. Okay, if no more other things, we can move on to the next topic. Kate added this. Do you want to share something or?
No, I just wanted to share a general update on the proposal. So basically, I have been working in the Strimzi community to try and get agreed a proposal for how we will integrate Strimzi with service binding specification. So at the moment, the way that Strimzi does things isn't the best fit for the way that service binding spec expects things to be, specifically in that Strimzi doesn't have all of its credentials and things like that in one place. They're scattered between various secrets and actual CRs and bits and pieces. So we've got a proposal going. It looks like so originally I put forward a few different choices, and at the moment the Strimzi community is looking like they're going to create a new CR which can be bound to, and then that new custom resource will create a secret that will have everything in. And then from a service binding perspective, it makes it much more straightforward because we can just make sure that the new custom resource has the status binding field in its status, and that points to the correct secret. The thing that I was looking for was firstly just to give you that update, but also we're actively discussing which fields we should have and what the name should be for the certificates. So in Strimzi, we have use of certificates in a few different ways. So we use them for TLS for just securing the endpoints, but we also support mutual TLS so that clients can connect and secure Kafka using mutual TLS if they want to. As you can see, we've got the listed set of names there. It's specifically around the certificate related ones. Those names there are the ones that Strimzi currently uses. And so that's what we've got at the moment. But I have put further down a little paragraph with some other suggested names. I think it would be really useful just to get feedback from people outside of the Strimzi space. So I was just wondering if anyone in the service binding operator space had experience of other operators and what they sort of do, or have input that they could give, because it'd be really nice if I can take whatever we decide to do in Strimzi back to the spec and see if we can get that updated. So I want us to try and pick names like keys for the secret that are going to make sense for other operators as well. So that's the kind of ask, is just to kind of let people know we are actively having this discussion. If anyone has any thoughts or opinions or knows of other operators and kind of what other people are doing, that would be really interesting. We have a lot of different files that have certificates in, whereas I think at the moment the specification just has 2 keys for certificates, a certificate one and then a key one. For Strimzi, we have the cluster like CA certificate that you have to trust versus individual client certificates for TLS. We have trust stores that have been generated for you, so you can use them as part of your apps. So there's a few different types of files floating around. So yeah, that's pretty much it.
Thanks, Kate. I mean, this is really great progress on that proposal. What I want to say, given the you referred to spec, and so what's currently in the spec is just more like a sort of convention, like initial convention. So what should be the names of particular keys, or like what would be a good name for that? It's not set in stone, so there's definitely a possibility to improve that. It's more the question, like regarding in the Kafka context, I'm not sure if there is any other Kafka operator in the wild. And if there is, maybe first these operators should consolidate among each other regarding the names, because at the end of the day, it's irrelevant what the spec says. It's more relevant what the application expects to see, or the runtime. So what the origin of that convention, the spec comes from the Spring Cloud Binding library.
Okay.
And if you look there, so you will see that they support a number of services, and they practically defined how, the properties, username, password, and so on, how they should be called, so that simply that kind of library can find them and initialize clients properly.
Mm-hmm.
So the question is all boils down to now the Kafka client or clients. How can they be configured through some property mechanism? And if yes, then maybe you should just adopt that or like modify slightly to work good. That would be my initial idea around that. And still, you have a possibility to differentiate yourself. I mentioned the PR. One mandatory key is type, which needs to signal that it's Kafka binding. So something like Kafka could be appropriate thing. But then you have a provider key where you can actually say, hey, actually that's Strimzi operator. So in case that your application can really, grab bindings from multiple operators, then runtime or library could simply say, okay, we are talking here about Strimzi, so I know that certificates field is this, and user certificate is this, and so on. So there is an option for that. But yeah, is there any other, apart from managed Kafka now approach, so is there any other Kafka operator available in the wild?
Yeah, so the other operator that I'm aware of is the Confluent one.
Mm-hmm.
I'll have to go and have a look at how they expose their properties and certificates and things like that. In terms of formatting and displaying things in a way that makes sense for clients, we have done that to a certain extent, because you'll notice if you have a look at the proposal in the secret that we've got the Jazz config listed. So if you're running a non-Java Kafka client, you use generally sort of the username, password, and construct things perhaps differently. But specifically when using Java, you will likely need a Jazz config string. And so Strimzi provides that directly. So that's a field that we'll definitely be adding. I don't think we'll necessarily try to contribute that back to the spec, as it wouldn't apply to non-Kafka clients. But in terms of the other certificate files, we've chosen, I guess, names that describe the person who is supposed to use them. So whether it's a user versus a certificate authority file, as opposed to the use of it. So trust store, key store, etc. And the thing I wonder about is whether there's a convention within service binding of the name being how we intend the application to use it, as opposed to where the credential has come from, and whether for other applications that are using, for example, mutual TLS, whether things like trust store and key store would make more sense than user and CA.
Right, but service binding operator is really just that doesn't really try to interpret anything or know anything about the semantic of the keys. So it's just kind of messenger to the application. I think the agreement needs to come from the runtime side, saying, okay, so in order to initialize connection to Kafka, we would like to find keys with following names, and then if you can, or like depending on the provider type or something to understand, so where to look for something. So I think it's more a question for runtime. So what they would like to expect, what is the minimal effort to adapt them to be cross operator compatible or something like that.
Okay. Yeah, I think that makes sense. I might have a think about some other options, because what we haven't proposed here at all is actually just, before now I was focusing very much on providing keys that would be generic and that could have a generic meaning, so that they could be defined as a known name in the spec. For example, obviously username, password are in the spec, but we could go in a completely different direction with this, and in the secret actually just lean into the fact that this is a Kafka operator. And in the same way that we have Bootstrap server as one of the keys, equally we could have other Kafka configuration names for some of these pieces. So that would be another way that we could go.
Yeah, you can practically, you maybe encode in one of the whatever it is, client, something you can encode then depending on the configuration, either certificates or username, password, or whatsoever, right? Yeah, yeah. But it's interesting too. So Jasper, you're sharing the screen, right?
No.
No, who's
Just
sharing?
Baiju.
So
I'm sharing,
I
yeah.
saw for a moment you were having on display the Spring Cloud Binding library,
Yeah.
and it's interesting to see, for example, compared to your proposal, Kate, they're not even like considering users as such. Like you have a Bootstrap servers and then what, consumers or producers.
No.
So
right. Actually, it is not like that. The way how this document is written is that they're given the common fields at the beginning, and later additions. The other fields are like specific extra fields. So this is not a comprehensive list. This is more like a kind of recommendation or suggestion. That's it. It's not a complete one. That's what my understanding. So what you see here, Kafka thing is the fields in addition to what is they're required by default. So like that.
Yeah,
Ah.
so with Bootstrap
Yeah.
servers as the example, we provide Bootstrap servers as one of the keys in the secret. However, it would be up to the application whether they want to use that Bootstrap server's address to be a consumer Bootstrap address or a producer Bootstrap address or a streams Bootstrap address. That's just the type of Kafka application it is. But they would each use the same Bootstrap server, but you have to configure them separately. You have to tell Kafka for consumers use this one, for producers use this one, etc. So I think in what we would have likely if we went through this approach in the Strimzi secret, we would have what you have here without the consumer dot producer dot on the beginning. So we'd have Bootstrap servers, and then we would have perhaps like trust store and key store.
Mhm.
And then in your application, you would configure consumer.truststore, consumer.keystore, but the service, the Strimzi creating the secret has no idea whether you're a producer or a consumer, so it wouldn't specify that prefix.
All right, but but in that case, for example, I mean, Spring framework, people claim that any Spring application is service binding ready if you add the Spring Cloud binding to their class path.
Mhm.
And so we verified that, for example, with Pet Clinic. So adding this and connecting to the Postgres, it was just really, transparent and it was working. So wouldn't it also make sense when we're trying to make now the Strimzi operator more service binding compatible to kind of consider also what cloud binding is exactly, because if you can also expose something which they understand, then you can basically make any Spring framework application of Strimzi ready, more or less.
Yeah, I'll definitely look into what Spring and microprofile and pieces like that do in order to get hold of their credentials. And yeah, it may be that is a more appropriate approach for Strimzi, is to actually go with more Kafka specifically named keys, but so that then the application has to do less work rather than trying to define keys that are more generic and can be reused by other operators.
Yeah,
I think that's
Kate,
really good.
maybe, I don't know whether you've seen this one. You can take a look at this blog post I written some days back. This explains
great.
how to set it up. This is for PostgreSQL, by the way, but I think similar things should work for the others also.
Cool. Yeah, I'll take a look. Thanks.
Yeah. So just I have a question. So this there will be different kinds of users that is connecting to the same Kafka, right? Like you trying to point out the normal user and then some CA. That's why this separate credentials.
So the reason why there are separate certificates there are because from the application's point of view, they have to do two things. First, they may have to connect using a secure connection. If that is the case, then they need to trust the Kafka CA. So that's why the CA is provided. So if TLS is enabled, then they need to use the CA. If they're using SSL, TLS is still referenced everywhere in Kafka. So then once they've connected via secure or not, they then have to authenticate. In Kafka, in Strimzi at least, there are two different options. You can either use SASL Scram or you can use mutual TLS. If you're using SASL Scram, that's where the username, the password, and the SASL Jazz config come in. You would either use username, password, or SASL Jazz config, not both, because the Jazz config has the username, password in it. But if you're using mutual TLS, then separately you need the certificates that you're going to put into your key store. So if I was using mutual TLS when I was configuring my application, I would use the CA certificate for my trust store, and I would use the user certificates to create my key store. And I would configure both of those in my properties that I pass to Kafka, to the Kafka client.
Okay.
And if I created a second application, the CA certificate it would be given would be the same CA certificate as my first application, but it would get a different user certificate because the user certificate is sort of unique to that user.
Yeah, right.
And how differs now this particular proposal to what Managed Kafka team is doing?
So I haven't managed to quite get to the bottom of exactly what Managed Kafka are doing. I believe they're doing something similar to what we're doing in that they've created a separate resource, I think, that they're creating that has the right pieces in it. So I don't think they're going the full way of creating like a separate actual resource that people can configure, but because Managed Kafka is obviously managed, I think what the team have done is basically just created a single secret that has the right pieces in it, and they will create that for you and put it in the right place so that it can be bound to. That's my understanding. I'm still digging to find out exactly how they're doing it.
Yeah. So this dot is like a separator that you're using to distinguish the fields, right?
What do you mean? Sorry.
I mean the dot character within this user dot like this.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that's because those are files. So ca.crt is the certificate file. So that's why the dots are there, because they're the file extensions.
Yeah.
Obviously, password is not a normal file extension, but that just has the password for the archive file in it.
Right. Okay. I'll take a look at it again sometimes later today.
Thanks. I do have to drop for another call, but
Okay.
yeah, any feedback anyone has would be great, and I'll definitely check out those other pieces around Spring.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks, guys.
Okay. Do we have any other issues? So, a second.
That's quite interesting. Huh? It's a good use case we can learn from.
Okay. I see one issue only. Okay, 21 days ago. Now, do we need to spend some time with this any of the latest or recently added issues?
No.
No, right? Okay. Okay, this was some known thing, I guess. Okay, then if no agenda, then maybe we can wind up. Then. Thank you all.
Okay. Sounds good.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.